Deep beneath the earth, a hidden fortress holds 5 diplomats trapped by a ruthless militia. As the ground begins to shake and time runs out, a team races through dark tunnels filled with traps and secrets. Will they escape alive, or will the fortress claim them forever? It started with a grainy satellite image, one that didn't make sense at first glance. The photograph captured just past midnight showed a patch of land near the Turkish border, deep inside northern Syria. At first, it looked like any other remote wasteland, dry earth, jagged rocks, and shadows that stretched longer than they should. But in the lower left corner, barely visible through the haze, was a strange, perfect outline, something man-made dug into the earth. A ring-shaped depression, possibly a hatch, with faint vehicle tracks disappearing into what looked like the hillside itself. Back at the operations center, analysts leaned closer. The image was rerun through every filter they had. When the contrast sharpened and the shadows were peeled back, the truth hit like a silent alarm. This wasn't natural. It was an entrance, not just to a bunker but to something much deeper. The image was connected almost immediately to the abduction of 5 diplomats, 2 Americans and 3 Allied officials, who had vanished from a convoy 3 weeks earlier. The convoy had been traveling under heavy escort when it was ambushed on a back road not far from the area shown in the photo. Their vehicles were found days later, burned and abandoned. No one had heard from the hostages since. No group had claimed responsibility. No trace of them had surfaced. Now, this image, this strange compound in the ground, and then came the drone footage. A small surveillance drone was deployed the next morning. What it captured added a fresh layer of unease. From high above, it filmed figures moving in tight formation, armed, alert, and guarding several sunken pathways that led underground. Trucks arrived with equipment. Crates were hauled inside. The men wore no markings, no uniforms. They moved with discipline, but something about their rhythm felt rehearsed, unnatural. Then the drone picked up something worse. Short sections of tunnel roofs reinforced with metal sheeting, warning signs painted in red on the rock, shadows that flickered unnaturally, possibly decoys or traps, and there etched into the hillside, what looked like vents. This wasn't a hideout. It was a full-scale underground compound, designed to breathe, expand, and possibly defend itself from within. Back at the forward command center, eyes turned to one another. That same night, a local contact arrived at the base in secret. He was limping, tired and trembling with exhaustion. His name wasn't shared, only his story. He had been part of a small local rescue group that had attempted to reach the area days earlier. They thought they knew where the hostages were being held. They had planned a quick extraction, but as they approached the area, something shifted. Paths changed. Rockfalls blocked exits. Voices echoed in strange ways. He was the only one who made it back. When asked what he saw, he gave only a short answer before collapsing into a chair. "The fortress breathes," he whispered. That phrase stuck. It echoed through the halls and across every screen. People didn't know what it meant, but they believed it. Something about that place felt alive. Too many entrances, too many dead ends, no map, no layout, only shadows and guesses. The kind of place that didn't let people go once they stepped inside. Within hours, a small team was assembled, hand-picked, experienced, but each carrying ghosts of their own. At the center of the group was Staff Sergeant Cole Ramirez, quiet, observant, and unnervingly calm. Ramirez had led a rescue mission years earlier in Iraq that ended badly. Lives were lost. Some say it wasn't his fault. Others weren't sure. Ramirez never spoke about it. But since then, he'd become the kind of leader who studied every step twice, who checked doors twice, and who never let emotion rush his judgment. With him was Corporal Malik Boyd, young, sharp, and with a mind that could map a tunnel in seconds. Before he joined the team, Boyd had worked in mining operations across Kentucky. He knew the difference between natural rock and disturbed soil. He could feel changes in air pressure. Underground, he was the kind of person who could sense danger long before it arrived. The third was Sergeant First Class Nina Jarecki, an expert in psychological operations and communications. Jarecki was known for talking enemies into surrendering, or allies into surviving. She understood how people thought under pressure, how fear crept in when air ran low, or footsteps echoed where they shouldn't. She had trained with survival experts and worked in dark zones across several continents. But this mission, this was different. Even she felt the change in the air. When the three met for the first time in the briefing room, the energy was tense. Ramirez stood with arms folded, reviewing drone maps. Boyd leaned in, asking questions no one else thought to ask, and Jarecki watched them both, silent but focused, reading the room like a puzzle. The analyst presenting the data walked them through the operation. Their mission would be to enter through a suspected access point near a dried riverbed, travel through what they believed to be the service tunnels, locate the hostages, and extract through the far end. But, the analyst added slowly, we don't have a full layout. These tunnels aren't mapped. We think there may be traps. We also think the hostages are being moved. How do we know they're even alive? Boyd asked. The analyst hesitated. We don't, but there was heat movement last night, small clusters of activity, separate from the guards. Ramirez didn't flinch. We go in assuming they're alive. As the team left the room, their steps were silent. Outside, the sky had already turned a darker shade. Storms were building on the horizon, and the air carried a strange stillness. None of them said it out loud, but all three felt it. This wasn't just another mission. This place, this underground labyrinth, it had weight to it, like it had been built, not just to hold people but to keep secrets buried. Something about it didn't want to be found. Ramirez walked alone for a moment before heading to the equipment room. He took out an old photo from his jacket, worn at the edges, a reminder of the last time he'd led a rescue and how it ended. He put it back without a word. Boyd reviewed schematics, scribbling alternate tunnel routes in a notebook with quick, nervous hands. He paused once, staring at a corner of the page where the lines refused to connect. Something felt off. Jarecki sat by herself near the radio unit, listening to static. Beneath the noise, she thought she heard something. A faint rhythm. Breathing. But when she leaned in, it was gone. In less than 48 hours they would descend into the fortress. No one could promise what they'd find, but one thing was clear. The deeper they went, the more the ground seemed to shift beneath their feet. And somewhere inside, 5 people were waiting. If they were still there at all. They called the operation Silent Echo, a name that carried a sense of finality. It wasn't loud or heroic. It was quiet, precise, measured, and as some would whisper behind closed doors, it might just be a one-way ticket. The team was called into the secure room before sunrise. Dim light filtered through the high windows as the projector hummed to life. Staff Sergeant Cole Ramirez stood with arms crossed, his eyes locked on the map displayed across the wall. Corporal Malik Boyd sat at the edge of his chair, tapping a pen against his leg, while Sergeant First Class Nina Jarecki leaned back just enough to appear calm, though her eyes missed nothing. A senior intelligence officer stepped into the room, placed a thick folder on the table, and began speaking in a voice steady enough to silence the air. We've confirmed it. 5 hostages, all alive, as of last night. 2 American diplomats, 1 British, 1 German, 1 Canadian. Last visual contact was through heat signatures, spotted inside the southern section of the fortress. He clicked a remote and the image on the screen shifted, a detailed overhead rendering of the compound's outer shell. Lines ran across the earth like veins, most disappearing into nothing. This is the only satellite pass we've managed in daylight. The fortress is buried deeper than we thought. No surface-level entrances are visible anymore. The only potential access is here. He circled a dark patch beside a dried riverbed. We believe this was once used to drain water. Now it's likely being used to bring supplies in. Ramirez narrowed his eyes. How long do we have? The officer paused. 6 hours. That's your window based on an intercepted message. The militia plans to move, or possibly execute the hostages if no communication is made by then. Silence gripped the room. No airstrikes? Jarecki asked. Not an option, the officer answered. They're buried too deep. Any surface blast could seal the tunnels or collapse the chambers. This has to be done with precision. No margin for error. He advanced the slide again. A grainy image of a man appeared. Mid-40s with sharp eyes and a cold expression. Karim al-Sarif, ex-military, specialized in tunnel warfare. Disappeared 5 years ago after defecting from a neighboring country's defense unit. He's the one running this operation. He knows how to build traps, how to use terrain, and more importantly, he knows how to make his enemies feel like they're being watched even when they aren't. He's not holding them for money? Boyd asked. No, the officer said. He wants trade, weapons, prisoners, leverage. But negotiations stalled last week, and now he's losing patience. That's why we believe he's moving up the timeline. The next image showed a rough drawing of the fortress interior. Tunnels crisscrossed in chaotic patterns. Red zones were marked where movement had been detected. Still, large portions were blank. We don't have a full layout. What we know comes from heat tracking, old mining data, and one partial map recovered from a local contact. The extraction route runs north. Once you reach the chamber where we believe the hostages are held, you'll need to push through another section and exit through what we're calling the North Tunnel. Ramirez stepped closer to the screen. What's between the chamber and the North Tunnel? That's the problem, the officer said. We don't know. The footage suggests the passage is long and partially sealed. It's possible it's booby-trapped. We believe Al-Sharif has installed pressure-sensitive mechanism. If too much weight is applied in certain areas, the system could trigger a collapse or seal doors behind you. Boyd's fingers froze on his pen. How many pressure points? We can't confirm. Maybe 5, maybe 50. The tension thickened. We'll be walking into a maze, Jarecki said quietly. Exactly, the officer confirmed. A maze with eyes. The phrase landed hard. The officer walked around the table, resting his hands on the edge. You'll carry only what's necessary. No heavy packs, no electronics that aren't mission essential. We'll have comms open for as long as the signal lasts. Once you drop below the second layer of the tunnel, contact will likely fade. Once we're in, Ramirez said, there's no turning back. That's correct, the officer said. If you're caught, there's no one coming after you. Boyd exhaled slowly. That's comforting. They laughed, but not really. Jarecki turned toward the screen. Any chance the hostages have been moved from the original holding chamber? It's possible, the officer admitted, but the latest heat reading matches the same area we saw activity in before. Multiple human figures, not moving much. That suggests confinement. Ramirez nodded. Then we head for that chamber first. If they're not there, then you adapt, the officer said firmly. You all know what's at stake. The door opened, and the base commander stepped in. He looked older than his age, worn by too many missions like this one. He walked straight to Ramirez. I chose your team because each of you has seen what can't be taught. Pain, patience, loss, and still, you came back. That means you understand what these hostages are going through. You understand the value of time. You have 6 hours to bring them out. If you don't, Ramirez cut him off gently. We will. The commander looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned to Jarecki and Boyd. You have your orders, you know the cost. As the team left the room, there was no chatter, only the quiet sound of footsteps on concrete. Outside, the sun was just beginning to rise. It cast long shadows across the desert, where every inch of land looked the same. But beneath their boots, somewhere deep below, was a place that didn't want to be found. A fortress with walls that whispered, traps that breathed, and 5 lives waiting in the dark. Ramirez stood by the loading truck, adjusting his vest. Jarecki checked the signal strength on her portable transmitter, watching as the lines dipped in and out. Boyd flipped through his notebook, his finger pausing on a hand-drawn sketch he couldn't explain. A corridor that curved when it shouldn't, an exit that never led out. He looked at Ramirez. Still think we'll find the way? Ramirez didn't smile. We'll make one. They boarded the truck. As the engine rumbled to life and dust rose behind them, the silence inside the vehicle was heavy. Somewhere beneath that broken land, time was running out, and the fortress was waiting. The desert night was thick with silence. Stars shimmered faintly above, but down in the ravine, the shadows swallowed everything. The truck had dropped them off hours ago. Now, with only soft red lights guiding their gear, the team stood before what looked like nothing more than a jagged crack in the earth. But Boyd knelt beside it, brushing away the loose sand and dust until the old ventilation shaft revealed itself. A square opening, barely wide enough to squeeze through, waited like an open mouth. This is it, he whispered, already unhooking his pack. Jarecki wrinkled her nose. Smells like rust and wet stone. It's damp, Boyd confirmed. That means the interior tunnels are still vented. That's good. Ramirez gave a single nod, then dropped to his stomach and slid inside. One by one they followed, crawling through narrow metal channels lined with condensation. The air was cold and close. Every movement echoed. Shoulders scraped against the sides. Breathing was shallow. No one spoke. Minutes stretched. The shaft twisted left, then dipped downward. They dropped into a lower crawl space barely higher than a suitcase. Water dripped from overhead pipes. Jarecki's hands slipped on slick metal, but she caught herself against the wall. steadying her breathing. "Keep going," Ramirez whispered back. "Almost there." The shaft ended at a rusted grate. Ramirez gently pushed it open, and the team emerged into the top of a vertical shaft with a metal ladder fused into the rock wall. They descended in silence, one after the other, until they reached solid ground, dark, uneven stone carved by tools and time. They had entered the fortress. Boyd activated a small red light, illuminating just enough to see the immediate path ahead. The tunnel was tighter than expected, and the air held a strange, vibrating silence. Something about the walls felt wrong, too polished in some places, too raw in others, like the earth had been carved by different hands at different times. "Stay low," Ramirez murmured. "Every sound travels in here." They crept forward. Moisture slicked the floor. The only sounds were quiet footsteps and the occasional crackle of dust shifting under boots. Then Jarecki froze. "Wait," she whispered. A faint clicking sound echoed ahead. Boyd tilted his head, listening. "Something's wired." He crouched and scanned the edges of the tunnel. Just beyond a bend, a thin wire stretched across knee-height, barely visible in the dark. Following the wire with his eyes, he spotted a crude cylindrical object tucked behind a loose panel in the wall, a decoy trap rigged to trigger motion and noise. "It's not real," he muttered. "Just a sound bomb, meant to scare or distract." "Still enough to draw attention," Ramirez said. Jarecki stepped too close while peering at the trap. The heel of her boot nudged a loose stone. Click. Boyd lunged, grabbing her collar and yanking her back as the stone shifted. Nothing happened for a breath, then the wire twitched and released. A sudden burst of mechanical whirring erupted behind the wall. Dust fell from above. A hidden compartment opened with a hiss, but instead of an explosion, a series of blinding lights flashed in strobing pulses down the corridor. Back now," Ramirez barked. They darted around the bend, pressing their backs to the tunnel wall. The lights faded after a few seconds, but the echo of their noise lingered like a storm trapped in the stone. Jarecki leaned against the wall, her chest heaving. "Thanks," she said softly. Boyd just nodded, too focused to respond. That was a warning system, not meant to destroy, meant to wake someone up. They moved again, this time slower, more careful. As the tunnel narrowed, they reached a junction where 4 paths split into different directions. The walls here were scraped, not naturally, but deliberately. Boyd moved forward, brushing his glove across the stone. "There are markings," he said, "scratches and patterns." Symbols had been etched into the rock, sharp, deliberate strokes resembling arrows and slashes, pointing in different directions. One pointed down a path labeled faintly with a symbol Boyd recognized from the recovered map, a triangle over a square, a marking that supposedly meant prison. "Could be legit," Boyd said. But it could be a trap," Ramirez finished. They stood for a moment, weighing the choice. In the silence, the air felt different, heavier. "We'll follow it," Ramirez decided. "But carefully, no assumptions." They continued, single file. The tunnel grew colder. Dampness clung to their clothes. At one point the passage split again, only this time, the path to the left looked identical to the one on the right. Still, Boyd noticed something. He crouched and studied the floor, then pressed a hand to the wall. "Here," he whispered. "This path, it's fake." Ramirez moved beside him. "What do you mean?" "The ground's been filled. Look at the edges. This was once a real path, maybe even the correct one, but someone collapsed it intentionally and then masked it to look normal. If we'd stepped on it, it wouldn't hold. We'd fall into a chamber, probably not one meant for walking out of." They shifted direction again, following the more stable path. Tension rose with every step. The tunnel twisted in unnatural ways, some areas lined with wooden reinforcements, others jagged and raw, like the earth had been split. Then the voices began. Soft at first, barely there, just a murmur riding the air. Jarecki paused, eyes wide. "You hear that?" Everyone froze. The sound grew, faint whispers, like dozens of voices speaking at once, too low to understand, but impossible to ignore. The team pressed their backs against the tunnel walls. "It's not real," Boyd whispered. It's the walls. Maybe vents. Sound carried from somewhere else." "Or it's a looped recording," Jarecki said. "Psychological warfare. It gets inside your head." "Whatever it is, ignore it," Ramirez said, voice calm. "We stay focused." But the voices didn't stop. They rose and fell in strange waves, sometimes laughter, sometimes weeping. It clawed at their minds as they pushed deeper into the tunnel. After another turn, they found a broken section of the passage. The ceiling had partially collapsed, revealing rusted piping and older stone. Boyd looked up and smiled faintly. That's an old support line. Means we're close to the original core. We're getting near the heart of the structure. Ramirez nodded. Stay alert. If they're this eager to confuse us, it means we're close. The team moved through the gap, stepping over fallen beams and broken stone. The voices faded behind them. In the stillness ahead, only the sound of dripping water remained. The walls around them now looked different, smoother, reinforced, designed with intent. Somewhere up ahead, the hostages were waiting, and the fortress, silent once more, felt like it was breathing around them. The tunnel ahead narrowed again, just as the walls began to shift from rough stone to metal plating. It was subtle, but Jarecki noticed it first. Panels mounted at shoulder height, welded into the rock, some humming faintly. Feels like we're nearing the central systems, she whispered, eyes scanning the walls. Boyd nodded. Ventilation stronger here too. We're close to something. But Ramirez raised a hand signaling them to stop. He pressed his ear to the tunnel wall and listened. The others held their breath. There it was, soft footsteps, not theirs. Everyone dropped low, pressing to the wall as the sound grew clearer. It wasn't part of the plan. The route had been mapped carefully to avoid known patrols. Whoever was coming didn't belong to a pattern. A group, maybe 3 or 4. A faint orange glow flickered from around the next corner, the light from an oil lantern. Ramirez motioned for silence, his hand gripping the edge of the wall, but before they could reposition, a rock under Boyd's boot crunched louder than expected. Voices shouted, lights swung toward them. In the next second, chaos erupted. Muzzle flashes burst through the dark like lightning. The tunnel lit up in violent pulses as sound exploded in every direction. Bullets struck stone, throwing sparks and dust. The enclosed space made it almost impossible to tell where anything was coming from. Jarecki ducked behind a jutting pipe, returning fire with quick bursts. Boyd dove across the floor, sliding behind a broken crate left against the wall. Ramirez held position, calling out targets through the noise, until a sharp sting struck his upper arm. He staggered back into cover. I'm good, he said through clenched teeth. Just stung. Keep moving. The exchange lasted less than a minute, but it felt like forever. Then silence. The tunnel held its breath once more. Jarecki checked corners with shaking hands. Boyd stayed low, eyes scanning the smoke-filled air. Ramirez gripped his arm, blood soaking through his sleeve, but he waved off concern. Let me see that, Boyd said, pulling out a compact medical kit. He patched the wound quickly under dim red light, doing his best with the limited supplies they had. Ramirez's face was pale, but steady. You'll make it, Boyd said, but we need to hurry. The team moved deeper into the tunnel, shaken but alive. Just beyond the next bend, Jarecki spotted a door, narrow, rusted, and slightly ajar. Above it, faded lettering in Arabic. Boyd translated softly. Communications room. They entered slowly, weapons up. Inside, the room stretched wider than expected, walls lined with dusty monitors, frayed wires, and cracked equipment. In the corner, a generator hummed faintly. Still alive, Jarecki flicked a switch. Old screens blinked on. The grainy images made everyone freeze. The first feed showed 5 hostages, 2 women and 3 men, sitting on the ground inside a steel chamber, wrists chained to a central beam. Their eyes were open. They were alive. One of them, a British ambassador, stared directly at the camera with a quiet, tired defiance. Boyd's hands curled into fists. Then another feed caught their attention. Wait, Ramirez said, pointing. Zoom in on that one. It took a moment for the camera to adjust, but the face on the screen became clear, pale, sunken eyes, a face none of them had seen in nearly a year. Private Sean Rickles, declared missing 6 months earlier during a failed operation near Aleppo. Everyone had assumed the worst. But there he was, alive, shackled in a separate room. His face battered, but his posture still carried the stiffness of a soldier. Jarecki stepped back, stunned. That's not possible. He's supposed to be gone. He's not, Ramirez said quietly. He's here, in this fortress. Boyd's voice was heavy. They never said anything about him. This wasn't part of the mission. No, Ramirez agreed, but now it is. Jarecki turned from the screen and started scanning the old comms panel. This system's still running. Some of these cameras are motion triggered. That means the whole place is wired, and someone's watching. Boyd checked the map on the wall beside the monitors. Hostage chamber is here. North tunnel's the planned extraction. But this, he pointed to another marked room that's where they're holding Rickles. Opposite side. No direct route. Only way there is through a narrow crawlspace. Which means we'd split up, Jarecki said. Ramirez leaned against the table, the ache in his arm worsening by the second. He looked at the screens. 5 hostages in one room. 1 soldier thought lost forever. In another, time ticking. Options narrow. Rickles could have information, Boyd said. He might know about hidden traps, hidden exits. Or he could be bait, Jarecki added. You really think they don't know we're here now? Ramirez didn't answer at first. He looked at the map, then back at the screen. Rickles wasn't moving much, but there was something in his eyes. Still fighting, still waiting. Ramirez finally spoke. We came here for those diplomats. That hasn't changed, but I'm not leaving anyone behind. Jarecki met his eyes. Then we go for all of them? Ramirez nodded. We split. Jarecki, you and I head for the hostages. Boyd, you take the crawl space and reach Rickles. Alone? Boyd asked. You're the only one who can read underground like a book. If anyone can make it through, it's you. Boyd exhaled slowly. Then let's get moving. Jarecki uploaded the map into a tablet and handed it to Boyd. Watch the collapse zones, and don't trust the straight paths. They've rerouted some of them with false panels. Ramirez grabbed his gear again, face pale but steady. We don't get a second shot at this. We either all make it out, or none of us do. The team shared one last look, unspoken understanding in their eyes. Then they vanished into the darkness again, the echo of footsteps swallowed by the breathing fortress, the weight of 6 lives pressing down on every step they took. The narrow corridor leading to the hostage chamber was a maze of dangers waiting in silence. Every inch felt like a trap. The walls pressed in tighter, forcing the team into single file, their movements cautious and deliberate. The silence wasn't comforting. It was nerve-wracking, as if the tunnels themselves were waiting to react. Malik Boyd led the way, flashlight low and eyes sharp. He paused every few steps, brushing his fingers gently along the seams of the floor and wall. His breath slowed as he crouched near a slightly raised tile just a few paces from a sharp bend. Pressure plate, he whispered, barely loud enough for Ramirez and Jarecki to hear. If we step on it, the whole corridor might drop. Ramirez didn't speak. He trusted Boyd's instincts now more than ever. Boyd reached into a small pouch and pulled out a tool that looked more like it belonged in a garage than a battlefield, an old flat wrench with a worn grip. I learned this in the mines, he said quietly. Back home in Kentucky, we'd set sensors to catch gas leaks. You trip the wrong one, and you lose the whole shaft. With steady hands, Boyd slid the wrench under the tile's edge and slowly lifted. The metal creaked softly. He then slipped a folded piece of cloth underneath to distribute the pressure and locked it in place with a short length of wire. Step exactly where I do, he said over his shoulder. They followed, inch by inch, until the path turned again. Here, the real horror revealed itself. 3 tunnels branched out in different directions. Each looked nearly identical. Only one would lead them to the hostage. Ramirez scanned the walls and noticed marking symbols scratched into the surface, barely visible. He called Boyd over. See these? Boyd squinted, then smiled faintly. Miner's shorthand. This one here, he pointed to a curled arrow, means slope ahead. This one here, he pointed to a curled arrow, means slope ahead. This one here, he tapped a diagonal line with a circle under it. That means dead end. Jarecki raised an eyebrow. How do you know they're not tricks? I don't, Boyd replied, but whoever marked these knew what they were doing, and if it was Rickles like I'm guessing, he wouldn't have wasted time carving lies. They took the leftmost path. After another series of tight turns and a final set of wire-thin triple arms, each one bypassed with slow, careful movement, they reached a final steel door. This was it. Ramirez stepped forward, but before his hand could touch the handle, a faint voice called out from inside. Stop, please don't open it. It was a woman's voice, tired but clear. Who's in there? Ramirez called out. I'm Lorraine Mendez. I'm the U.S. ambassador. Please, if you open this door the wrong way, we're all gone. There's a trigger under the floor. Boyd quickly dropped to one knee, brushing dust away from the seam of the door and the stone floor beneath it. He found the edge of a steel panel, slightly discolored from the rest of the stone. She's right, he said, voice tight. There's a switch, rigged underneath. The weight of the door must hold it down. If we lift it, the pressure's released. Ramirez cursed under his breath. How much time do we have? Jarecki asked. Boyd's hands were already working. I don't know, but I hear ticking. From inside, Ambassador Mendez spoke again. One of the guards said something about the floor giving way if anyone tried to break in. He laughed when he said it. Jarecki crouched beside Boyd and handed him her flashlight. We'll lift it, but only an inch, just enough to see the wiring. They found the bolts under a thin sheet of welded metal. Boyd loosened them slowly. Each movement sent a faint metallic ping into the tunnel. Beneath the panel was a mess of wires, twisted together like a web. The small mechanism pulsed steadily, its clicking growing faster. Boyd inhaled through his nose, eyes narrowing. The timing's off. It's not a countdown. It's a rhythm sensor. It reacts to shifts in pressure. He took out a flattened wedge and slipped it gently under the center switch. Jarecki, holding the light steady, noticed a small folded piece of paper near one of the wires, partially hidden in a cloth scrap. She hesitated, then reached for it. It was a letter, handwritten, the ink smeared but still legible. To my daughter, if I don't make it out, know that I never stopped thinking of you. I kept your picture close every day. I'm sorry I won't be there for your next birthday, but I pray this isn't goodbye. Jarecki swallowed hard. Her throat tightened as she tucked the note into her vest. Ramirez noticed but didn't say anything. His eyes said enough. We're almost there, Boyd muttered, sweat running down his forehead. One more wire to brace. He held his breath and tightened the last piece with a careful twist. The clicking stopped. Silence returned like a wave. Boyd stepped back, exhausted. The floor's stable. You can open it slowly. Ramirez took the handle and eased the door open. The hinges groaned, echoing down the hallway behind them. The chamber inside was dim and cold, with 5 hostages sitting against the wall. One of them, a man in his 40s, was unconscious, his head slumped onto another diplomat's shoulder. Ambassador Mendez stepped forward first. Her face was pale, but her eyes showed steel. You made it, she said, but we need to hurry. They said they were moving us before sunrise. Ramirez nodded. We're not leaving without all of you. Behind him, Jarecki looked back down the hall. Every second they stayed felt like a second stolen from fate. They had the hostages, but Boyd wasn't back yet, and time was running out. The steel door creaked shut behind them, sealing the hostages in the safest place they'd known in weeks. Corporal Malik Boyd gave a quiet nod, his hands still trembling from defusing the trap, and then turned his attention to the rest of the chamber. The diplomats were weak, dehydrated, but alive. Jarecki passed out water tablets and energy bars, while Ramirez did a quick scan of their conditions. Ambassador Lorraine Mendez looked at Boyd, her voice low. There's another guard shift soon. If they find this chamber empty— Boyd didn't answer. He already knew. Every second they stayed here pushed them closer to disaster. Ramirez helped lift the unconscious diplomat, a trade delegate from the UK, according to his badge, and secured him across his shoulder. Nina took the smallest hostage, a young interpreter who could barely walk. They moved out fast, but carefully, sticking to the same route Boyd had marked. The lights flickered overhead, barely holding. The air smelled of damp stone and old rust. Then, without warning, a sharp tone echoed down the tunnel, a mechanical chirp, high-pitched and brief. Everyone froze. Boyd's head turned instantly. That wasn't us. A low clunk followed, then the whir of gears engaging in the ceiling. Jarecki's eyes widened. Motion alarm. Someone's returned. They tripped the secondary path. Ramirez cursed under his breath. They know we're here. As if to answer him, a burst of static crackled from a wall-mounted speaker, not far from where they stood. A voice followed, slow and deliberate. Karim al-Sarif, Jarecki whispered. That's him. The voice came through clearly, a final sentence carried by the echo of stone. Let the earth devour them. Then the speaker went dead. At first nothing happened. Then the ground gave a low rumbling groan. The lights blinked once, twice, and then the ceiling above them cracked open with a sickening grind. Boyd shouted, "Move! It's coming down!" A section of the corridor behind them collapsed inward, steel and stone twisting together like crumpled paper. Dust shot through the tunnel like a wave, chasing them as they ran. Ramirez held onto the unconscious diplomat tightly, his boots slamming into the uneven ground. Jarecki yelled for the hostages to keep low and follow her light. The walls shook again, this time with more force. A ventilation pipe snapped from the ceiling and crashed to the floor in front of them, splitting open with a hiss. Then came the wind. At first it was just a breeze, a sudden shift in airflow. But it grew stronger, unnaturally so. The ventilation system had reversed. Boyd yelled, struggling to be heard. They're sucking the air out. The system's gone into purge mode. The fortress was literally trying to suffocate them. Every breath became harder to take. The air grew thin, the dust became thicker. Each footstep felt heavier, each movement slower. Ramirez looked down at the unconscious man he carried, his chest barely moving. "We need to move faster," Nina shouted, dragging the interpreter forward. The backup tunnel, the one Boyd had identified on the surveillance map, was just ahead. It was supposed to bypass the main exit and lead to a forgotten shaft north of the compound. If it was still intact. They turned the final corner and Boyd shouted with relief, "It's here, the panel." He slammed his shoulder into the rusted door. It didn't budge. Jarecki helped him pry it open, her hands slick with sweat. With a final shove, the metal bent inward, and the escape tunnel opened before them. It was narrower, older, and even colder than the rest of the fortress. The walls were jagged, carved by hand decades ago. It twisted like a snake, sloping downward before rising sharply again. Behind them, the fortress continued collapsing in waves. A loud boom echoed from somewhere deep inside. The main chamber, perhaps. Boyd glanced back and saw a plume of dust chasing them, like a storm cloud. "Keep going," Ramirez urged, his voice hoarse. They sprinted. Jarecki began coughing hard, her chest heaving from the lack of clean air. She refused to stop. One of the diplomats stumbled and Boyd caught her, dragging her forward with one arm while holding a flashlight with the other. Finally, after what felt like forever, the tunnel leveled out and opened into a small chamber. It was circular, lined with stone, and dripping with moisture. At the far end, a rusted ladder led down into darkness, and just beside it a large circular hole, filled with still water. Boyd approached the edge and shone his light down. The shaft was at least 30 feet deep, and the water didn't look welcoming, but there was a faint shimmer at the far side. A metal grate bent open, possibly by time or earlier use. "This is it," he said. "This leads to the old drainage pipe. It'll take us to the surface." Jarecki looked down, then back at the group. "That's underwater." "Yeah," Boyd nodded grimly, "and it's our only way out." The rebreathers were pulled from their packs, small oxygen units made for emergency underwater escape. Not ideal. Half were barely functioning, and 2 didn't hold a full charge. Ramirez didn't hesitate. "We send the hostages first. Boyd, you guide them. Nina, you go with them. I'll cover the rear." "No," Boyd said firmly. "You've got the injured guy. He won't make it without help." There wasn't time to argue. The walls were groaning again. Cracks splintered through the ceiling. Boyd climbed into the shaft first, took one rebreather, and motioned for the interpreter to follow. She was terrified, but he nodded slowly. "You can do this. Just trust me." She hesitated, then jumped. The water swallowed her silently. One by one, the hostages followed. Boyd led them through the dark water, guiding them toward the bent grate he'd seen earlier. Jarecki helped with the last diplomat, steadying her breathing, whispering calm words before they went under. Ramirez remained above, with the unconscious man, and the last 2 rebreathers. The ground shook again, violently this time. A portion of the wall gave way, rocks tumbling across the chamber floor. "We have to go now," Jarecki shouted from below. Ramirez looked at the unconscious diplomat, then at the rebreathers. He only had one good one left. He put it over the man's face, secured it, and wrapped one arm around him. Then, without hesitation, he jumped into the shaft. The cold was like a punch to the chest. He kicked hard, aiming for the dim light ahead. The water pulled at him, his arms straining, lungs screaming for air. Just as darkness threatened to close in, he felt a hand grab him. Boyd pulling them both through the last narrow bend. They surfaced in a small pool surrounded by reeds and mud. Fresh air, stars above. Everyone was there, coughing, gasping, but alive. Ramirez rolled the diplomat gently onto the grass. Jarecki knelt beside him, checking his pulse. Boyd flopped onto his back, eyes closed. "We made it," he whispered. But none of them smiled, because behind them, in the distance, the ground rumbled one last time. The breathing fortress had finally exhaled. The cold wrapped around them like iron. The shaft had swallowed the team whole, one after another, into a world of darkness and silence. The water was so cold it stole their breath, and the narrow tunnel they swam through felt endless. With the fortress collapsing behind them and the rebreathers barely holding, each second underwater stretched like eternity. Nina swam close to Ambassador Mendez, her arm guiding the weary woman forward. Just behind them, Boyd kept his light low, sweeping side to side. The current was gentle but unpredictable, tugging at their limbs in strange directions. Ramirez stayed near the back with Specialist Yuji Nakamura, who was helping keep the unconscious trade delegate afloat. But the deeper they moved, the more debris drifted around them, scraps of metal, splintered wood, chunks of stone from the collapsing tunnels above. Then it happened. A sudden rumble above sent a cascade of rock and clay into the shaft. A beam from the fortress above collapsed and plunged through the water like a spear. It pinned Yuji near the far wall, trapping him between broken stone and a twisted metal pipe. The others swam ahead too far to see it happen. Only Ramirez noticed the dim flash of motion as Yuji struggled to free himself. Without hesitation, Ramirez turned and kicked hard against the current, ignoring the sharp sting in his shoulder. He reached Yuji in seconds. The younger man's eyes were wide behind his goggles, his hand pressed against the beam that held him. Ramirez motioned, "Stay calm, I've got you." With both hands he wedged his boot against the wall and shoved. Nothing. He adjusted, pressed harder, heart pounding. His lungs were burning now. Finally the beam shifted. It rolled just enough for Yuji to slide out. They didn't waste another second. Together they pushed toward the faint glow ahead, the end of the tunnel. Then, all at once, they were free. The shaft spilled them into a rocky basin at the edge of a canyon, where the earth met open sky. Boyd emerged first, gasping, dragging one of the hostages to solid ground. Nina followed, pulling the interpreter with her. One by one the team surfaced drenched, shivering, but breathing. Ramirez and Yuji surfaced last, both barely conscious. Jariki was waiting at the edge of the pool and she reached in with shaking hands, dragging them both the final distance to shore. Then came the sound. The roar that shook the air. Behind them, the mountainside split open with a thunderous groan. Dust erupted from the cave mouth like steam from a volcano. The entire section of land that had once housed the underground fortress began to sink. Boyd pulled everyone back. "Get away from the edge." They stumbled uphill, coughing through the dust cloud. As the ground behind them vanished into a massive sinkhole, the remains of the breathing fortress dropped out of sight, swallowed whole by the land itself. Then silence. But it didn't last. A new sound cut through the quiet, the mechanical click of weapons and the sharp bark of foreign voices. Shadows emerged through the dust, armed figures, stepping from the trees and ridges above. The militia. They had waited for them to surface. Karim's men were here, and they weren't letting anyone go without a final fight. The team ducked for cover, Ramirez dragging Yuji behind a broken stone ledge, Nina shielding the hostages with her body. Jareki rolled beside Boyd behind a clump of brush, checking her sidearm. Boyd cursed under his breath. "We're out in the open." They had no high ground, no full cover, just rock and trees. The militia moved in slowly, confident, their footsteps crunching on gravel as they encircled the canyon floor. Then the first shot cracked through the haze. Jareki fired back, keeping it tight and focused, pinning down the forward patrol. Boyd flanked left, drawing attention away from Nina and the hostages. He fired once, ducked, then moved again. Dust kicked up around him as enemy rounds struck the ground. Ramirez took aim from behind a fallen tree, protecting Yuji while scanning for gaps in the line. "We can't hold this for long," Jareki said through clenched teeth. "We're outnumbered." "Then, we make every shot count," Boyd replied, reloading. The dust began to settle just enough for Boyd to see the enemy's silhouettes pressing closer. The lead gunman raised his weapon, then suddenly staggered. A distant roar echoed from the trees. Another figure fell. Then another. New shapes surged down the hill. Local allies, Syrian rebels loyal to the diplomatic mission. They came out of the trees with determination, flanking the militia from behind, catching them off guard. The tide shifted in seconds. The militia fell back in confusion, their lines broken. Boyd stood and waved both arms toward the incoming fighters. "Friendly, friendly." The rebel leader, a tall man with a thick beard and calm eyes, approached quickly. "We heard the collapse, followed the dust. You're lucky we were watching." Boyd let out a slow breath. "You have no idea." Within minutes the militia was retreating, those who could still move disappearing into the hills. The rebels helped secure the area. tending to the wounded and offering water to the shaken hostages. Nina knelt beside the interpreter, wrapping a thermal blanket around her shoulders. The young woman whispered something in Arabic and clutched Nina's hand. Ramirez leaned back against a rock, breathing hard. Yuji sat beside him, still pale but upright. "You came back," Yuji said quietly. Ramirez gave a tired half-smile. "Wouldn't be much of a team if I didn't." Cherokee joined Boyd at the ridge, where they looked out over the collapsed valley. Nothing was left of the underground base, only a smoking hole in the earth, surrounded by shattered stone and a choking dust cloud that refused to settle. Boyd finally exhaled. "Mission complete," he said, "but that place, it was alive." Cherokee nodded slowly. "And it almost kept us." Behind them the sun was starting to rise. It painted the canyon gold and crimson, light spilling across tired faces, broken ground, and the narrow trail that would lead them home. The helicopter blades sliced through the hot air as it lifted away from the rugged canyon, carrying the survivors and their rescuers toward safety. Inside the cramped cabin, quiet tension filled the space. The hostages, pale and weak but alive, rested against blankets, their faces marked by exhaustion and relief. One diplomat, however, lay still, unconscious and unresponsive. Despite the urgent efforts of the medical team, her condition worsened during the flight. By the time the helicopter touched down at the base camp, the news was grim. The woman had passed away. The team absorbed the bitter blow in silence. After all they'd fought through, this loss felt like a shadow over what had otherwise been a hard-won victory. Staff Sergeant Cole Ramirez sat apart from the others, staring out the window at the desert below. The weight of the mission pressed down on him heavier than ever. It wasn't just the loss of the diplomat, it was what came next. Orders had come in, demanding an investigation into Ramirez's decision to push forward despite the collapsing tunnels. The command was clear: abort the rescue when the tremors began. Ramirez had ignored it. His mind replayed every moment: the sinking ground, the desperate swim through darkness, the pinned teammate he had refused to leave behind. To him there was no choice. But questions were being asked. At the debriefing, his team stood by him without hesitation. Corporal Malik Boyd spoke first, his voice steady but firm. "If Cole hadn't kept us moving, we wouldn't be here. We owe our lives to him." The Sergeant First Class Nina Jareki added, "That decision saved the hostages. It was risky, yes, but sometimes risks have to be taken." Even Specialist Yuji Nakamura, still recovering, nodded quietly. The support helped, but Ramirez knew the investigation wasn't just about procedure, it was about judging his character, his judgment, his willingness to carry the burden of command. Among the rescued was Private Sean Rickles, the soldier they had believed lost months ago. He had spent long, harrowing months in captivity, surviving under conditions that tested the limits of his mind and spirit. In a quiet moment after the debrief, Rickles shared pieces of his ordeal with Ramirez and Boyd. He spoke of the relentless psychological pressure, the whispered threats, the constant watching, the feeling that escape was impossible. It was a kind of battle unlike any other, where the enemy fought with shadows and silence. Rickles' survival gave the mission a deeper meaning, turning it from a simple rescue into a story of resilience. Nina, meanwhile, carried a weight of her own. She had found a small folded letter tucked in the clothing of Ambassador Lorraine Mendez before the extraction. It was a goodbye note, filled with quiet words of hope and love for her family. At the base camp that evening, Nina took the letter outside. She held it in her hands for a long moment before lighting a match and watching the paper curl and vanish in the flames. "No one needs to know how close it came," she whispered, eyes fixed on the glowing embers. It was her way of honoring the sacrifices made in silence, away from the public eye. For Boyd, the mission's scars were not just emotional, but carved into the fabric of his daily life. When he returned to his small hometown, the quiet streets and familiar faces felt strange after everything he'd endured. To keep the memory alive and to remind himself of the courage it took to survive, he began carving a replica of the fortress's underground tunnels in his basement. Each twist and turn, every hidden trap, every narrow escape was etched carefully into the wood. It was more than a map. It was a tribute to the team, to the lost and the saved, and to the strength that had carried them through the darkness. As Boyd worked, he thought of Ramirez, Nina, Yuji, and the hostages they had fought so hard to free. That labyrinth in his basement was a reminder that even in the darkest places, hope could still find a way through. And that, in the end, was what truly mattered. If you're proud to be American and honor the courage of our war heroes, hit that subscribe button. Join us to uncover more powerful true stories of bravery and sacrifice that deserve to be remembered.